Hey guys, quick warning. Before we start, everything you're about to hear is 100% real. Not internet fiction, not urban legends. Actual documented history. The kind of history that makes you wonder how humanity survived the Stone Age without a user manual. This is a collection of moments where logic clocked out, common sense shut down, and people confidently sprinted toward the worst possible decision, usually with paperwork signatures and official approval. Some of these stories are funny. Some are unsettling. Most of them make you laugh and then immediately feel uncomfortable about it. So buckle up, because if aliens are watching us, these exact moments are why they lock their doors when they fly past Earth. 1. In 1958, right in the middle of the Cold War, a group of very intelligent people at the US Air Force looked up at the moon and asked a question only humans could come up with. What if we nuked it not for science, not for exploration, just to show the Soviet Union who was boss in space? The plan, called Project A-119, had one clear requirement: the explosion needed to be bright enough for people on Earth to see with the naked eye. Basically a giant sky notification saying America is online. Shockingly, this idea was discussed seriously. Meetings were held. Papers were written. The plan was only canceled when someone finally asked the most inconvenient question possible. What happens if radioactive moon dust falls back onto Earth? After a brief silence, everyone realized that covering the planet in fallout just to flex might be bad optics. Not because it was dangerous, but because it would look terrible. 2. German submarines in World War II were famous for precision engineering, strict discipline, and cutting-edge technology. And all of it was defeated by one humble enemy, the toilet. The U-1206 was equipped with an advanced flushing system that could eject waste directly into the ocean while submerged. Very sophisticated. Unfortunately, it was so complicated that it required a specially trained technician just to operate it. One day, the captain decided to handle his own bathroom business. He turned the wrong valve, just one. Seawater flooded back into the submarine, poured into the battery compartment, and created toxic gas. No enemy ships, no torpedoes, no dramatic battle, just toilet water and one bad decision. The submarine was forced to surface right as British ships were patrolling overhead. U-1206 was immediately sunk. History remembers this as the moment one of the most advanced war machines ever built was taken down by not reading the bathroom instructions. 3. In legal history, very few lawyers have believed in their argument enough to shoot themselves in court. Clement Vallandigham did. While defending a man accused of murder, he argued that the victim had accidentally shot himself due to careless gun handling. To prove it, Vallandigham decided to reenact the incident in front of the jury. He grabbed a gun, performed the exact motion he had just described, and fully believed the gun was unloaded. Spoiler, it wasn't. The gun fired. Vallandigham collapsed. The courtroom went silent, not because the jury was convinced, but because they had just watched a lawyer turn a trial into an unscheduled suicide attempt. Ironically, his demonstration worked. The jury accepted his argument, and his client was acquitted. Vallandigham became one of the only people in history to win a case and die because of it. A powerful reminder that commitment to the bit is not always a winning strategy, especially when real guns are involved and nobody double checks. 4. During Prohibition, the US government faced an uncomfortable truth. Banning alcohol did not stop Americans from drinking. Instead of reconsidering the policy, the government chose a solution that felt extremely on brand. If people won't stop drinking, make the alcohol lethal. Federal agencies ordered industrial alcohol to be poisoned with toxic chemicals, assuming people would get scared and quit. This plan relied on one deeply optimistic assumption that when faced with death, humans would act rationally. They did not. People kept drinking. They filtered it, diluted it, prayed over it, and kept drinking. The result was around 10,000 deaths from alcohol poisoning, not from crime or war, but from a public policy designed to teach citizens a lesson. The government knew people were dying and kept going, anyway believing the responsibility belonged to those who drank. It remains one of the rare moments in history where a government looked directly at a disaster it caused and said, yes, people are dying, but morally we're right. 5. Some love stories transcend distance and time. This one transcended basic criminal law. Carl Tanzler was an X-ray technician in Florida who fell in love with a woman suffering from tuberculosis in a way that would get instantly rejected by Netflix for being too disturbing. When she died, the story should have ended with grief and a funeral. Carl disagreed. He secretly exhumed her body, brought it home, and preserved it using wax wire and various DIY materials to slow decomposition. He then lived with the corpse for 7 years, sleeping next to it, talking to it, and fully believing that love could overcome biology. It didn't stop there. Carl believed radiation and high-altitude air could revive the dead, so he began building a homemade aircraft in his backyard, hoping to fly her body into the sky and restart life itself. Neighbors thought he was eccentric. Authorities thought he was insane. Carl thought he was the most devoted man on Earth. This is not a romantic story. It's a case study in what happens when someone refuses to accept reality and instead commits fully to being wrong for a very long time. 6. During World War II, as global powers raced to build smarter and deadlier weapons, the US military looked at missile guidance systems and thought, this is way too complicated. What if we just used birds? And that's how Project Pigeon was born, a completely serious tax-funded program where scientists trained pigeons to guide missiles. The idea was simple in the most insane way possible. You put a few pigeons inside the nose of a missile. In front of them is a screen showing the enemy ship. As the missile flies, the pigeon pecks at the image. Each peck adjusts the missile's direction. If the pigeon pecks correctly, the missile hits the target. If the pigeon pecks wrong, that's between God and the pigeon. The terrifying part is that this system actually worked in lab tests. The pigeons were well-trained, highly focused, and frankly more reliable than several mid-level officers. The only real problem was that no general wanted to stake his career or an entire city on the judgment of 3 pigeons inside a flying suicide tube. The project wasn't canceled because it was stupid. It was canceled because explaining it at a press conference would have been impossible. 7. Wars are usually explained using big words like sovereignty borders or ideology. But in 1969, El Salvador and Honduras proved that none of that is necessary if you have a soccer match that gets spicy enough. The two countries already hated each other over immigration land and economics, but they were hating each other politely. Then the World Cup qualifiers happened. One lost a few rough tackles, and suddenly newspapers were screaming like national honor had been personally insulted by the universe. Fans rioted, homes were burned, immigrants were attacked. At this point, an adult probably should have stepped in and said, "Everyone calm down." No one did. El Salvador cut diplomatic ties. A few days later, planes took off, bombs dropped, and the football war officially began. About 3,000 people died over a tournament where only one team advanced, and nobody remembers the final score. Politicians later insisted soccer was just the last straw. History writes it more simply: humanity found a way to turn a sport into a legitimate excuse for war, and nobody felt particularly embarrassed about it. 8. During World War II, the US military looked at Japanese cities, mostly wooden structures, and thought, we need an idea that's both creative and deeply concerning. Enter the bat bomb. The plan was military logic at its finest. Attach tiny incendiary bombs to bats, release thousands of them at night. Let them roost in attics and rooftops, and then let the timed explosives burn entire neighborhoods from the inside out. A reasonable question would have been, what if the bats don't cooperate? Nobody asked. The project was a serious endeavor, complete with a name, a budget, and scientific reports. Bats were chosen because they love dark enclosed spaces, just like Japanese homes at the time. On paper, it was brilliant. In reality, bats do not read mission briefings. During a test run, several bomb-equipped bats escaped early. They didn't fly toward the fake target. They flew to the safest place they knew, the American base. They hid under roofs inside hangars and in storage buildings. Then the bombs went off. The base caught fire. The general's car caught fire. The project ended quietly. Not because it was immoral, but because weapons with wings, free will, and survival instincts tend to betray the people who strap explosives to them. 9. During the Napoleonic Wars, the people of Hartlepool, England had one significant disadvantage: they had never seen a Frenchman in person. This matters a lot. One day after a shipwreck, a monkey washed ashore. The monkey was wearing a tiny military uniform because it had been the ship's mascot. The villagers looked at the monkey, looked at the uniform, and reached the most reasonable conclusion available to them at the time: this must be a French spy. They arrested the monkey, locked it up, and held a full trial. The monkey did not speak English, which was taken as further proof that it was French. There was no defense lawyer, no witnesses. The trial ended quickly with a guilty verdict. The monkey was publicly hanged on the beach while the crowd cheered. Years later, people realized they had executed an innocent animal because they had never met a French person before. This story isn't just about stupidity. It's about what happens when ignorance meets confidence and fills the gaps with violence. 10. The 1904 St. Louis Olympics proved that an international sporting event can turn into a complete circus if nobody actually knows what they're doing. The marathon was run under brutal conditions: dusty roads, extreme heat, almost no water, and wild dogs casually joining the race. The winner didn't win by running the fastest, but by riding in a car for over 10 miles. When officials realized this, they still kept him as the winner for a while because apparently no one had planned for this scenario. Another runner placed fourth after consuming rat poison mixed with alcohol as a performance enhancer. He didn't win, but he nearly died. One athlete got chased off course by dogs. Another collapsed and took a nap mid-race from exhaustion. This wasn't a marathon. It was a social experiment on how badly things can fall apart when you slap the word Olympics on chaos. Instead of celebrating athletic excellence, the event accidentally proved that with poor planning, even the Olympic spirit can be taken down by dust boos and very bad decisions. 11. George C. Parker is the kind of guy who, if he were alive today, would absolutely run a podcast about getting rich in 3 easy steps. Step 1 being lose your conscience. He became famous for selling the Brooklyn Bridge to tourists. Not once, not twice, repeatedly. Parker would approach newly arrived visitors in New York, point at the massive bridge, and confidently explain that the government was quietly selling it to private owners. Buy now and you could charge tolls to everyone crossing it. It sounds insane, but Parker said it with the calm confidence of a man who had never faced consequences. And tragically, it worked. People bought ownership rights complete with fake paperwork Parker personally drafted, then showed up and set up toll booths on the bridge. New York police regularly had to dismantle these completely serious, very official-looking fake checkpoints. Parker didn't sell the bridge because people were stupid. He sold it because he understood a painful truth. If you speak confidently enough, people are willing to believe they just bought something that was never for sale. 12. Some wills are written to honor loved ones. Some are written to divide assets. And then there are wills written purely to see how fast humanity will completely lose its mind. A wealthy Canadian lawyer left his entire fortune to whichever woman could legally give birth to the most children within 10 years after his death. No conditions about parenting quality. No health limits. Just one rule: produce children. Immediately, a reproductive arms race began. Families treated childbirth like a long-term financial strategy. Women were constantly pregnant. Babies were born at factory speed. Newspapers tracked births like sports rankings. In the end, 4 women tied with 9 children split the inheritance. No one truly won. Everyone was exhausted. This story is often told as a bizarre curiosity, but it's also deeply unsettling. It proves that if you attach a big enough reward, people will gladly turn the most important decisions of their lives into a competition governed by extremely stupid rules. 13. Some towns are saved by armies, others by diplomacy. And then there's a town in Germany that was saved by one man's liver. During the 30 Years' War, Rothenburg was besieged and faced total destruction. The enemy offered a deal that sounded like a joke. If the mayor could drink an enormous jug, about 3 liters of wine in one go, the town would be spared. This was not symbolic, not ceremonial. This was real drinking in front of soldier citizens in imminent death. The mayor stepped forward, lifted the jug, and drank. No breaks, no hesitation, no collapse halfway through. He finished it. The town was saved. The mayor didn't die immediately, but reportedly slept for several days afterward, likely waiting for his brain to process what had just happened. History records this as a rare diplomatic victory achieved through alcohol and raw survival instinct, and a reminder that sometimes the fate of thousands depends on a single person's drinking capacity. 14. During World War II, the U.S. Navy had massive ships, advanced weapons, and safety procedures everyone believed were foolproof. None of that stopped the USS William D. Porter from becoming the unluckiest ship in naval history. During a training exercise, it was assigned to escort the battleship carrying President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The drill involved firing dummy torpedoes. Unfortunately, someone forgot to remove the detonator. A real torpedo was launched directly at the ship carrying the president. When the crew realized what happened, they panicked so badly that they broke the communication protocol to send an emergency warning. Roosevelt's ship turned just in time and the torpedo missed. No medals were awarded. No victories celebrated. The entire crew was arrested for almost assassinating their own president. It remains one of the few moments in history where the greatest threat to a head of state was not the enemy, but his own protection team trusting the checklist too much. 15. Some financial decisions make you shake your head. Others force the Postal Service to rewrite the law. In 1913, when parcel delivery was introduced in the U.S., people noticed an interesting loophole. The law allowed mailing packages under a certain weight, but never specified that packages couldn't cry. A couple in Ohio looked at train ticket prices, looked at their 8-month-old son, and made a brutally practical decision: mail the baby to grandma. They put postage on his clothes, filled out the address, and handed him over to a familiar postal worker. The baby arrived safely supervised and on time, completely legal. When the story spread, other families began considering similar options because mailing a child was clearly cheaper than buying a train ticket. The government eventually stepped in not because it was immediately dangerous, but because officials realized that if they didn't ban it, someone would eventually ask, do we get a discount if we mail too? 16. In 1919, Boston experienced one of the strangest urban disasters in history, caused not by bombs or earthquakes, but by molasses. A massive industrial storage tank ruptured, releasing over 2 million gallons of thick, sticky syrup. A brown wave, nearly 8 meters high, surged through the neighborhood at a speed fast enough to knock down buildings, flip cars, and carry people away. Victims didn't drown in the traditional sense. They were trapped, stuck, and suffocated in what was essentially liquid sugar. 21 people died. Hundreds were injured. The entire area turned into a nightmare you couldn't escape because everything you touched pulled you back in. Rescue efforts were so difficult that firefighters had to wade through molasses like it was wet cement, slowly hardening around them. For years afterward, locals claimed that, on hot summer days, the old neighborhood still smelled faintly sweet. It remains one of the only disasters in history that manages to be tragic, horrifying, and absurd, at the same time proof that reality occasionally becomes so ridiculous that even fiction would reject it as unrealistic. 17. During the Cold War, the CIA tried everything to spy on the Soviet Union satellites' human intelligence and ideas that sound like rejected dark comedies. One of those ideas was Operation Acoustic Kitty. The plan was simple and deeply unhinged: turn a cat into a mobile listening device. The CIA spent around $20 million in 5 years surgically implanting a microphone in a cat's ear, a battery in its abdomen, and an antenna running along its tail. On paper, this was cutting-edge technology. In reality, they had just created a cat that still behaved exactly like a cat. On the very first field test, they released their 4-legged agent near a park bench where targets were talking. The cat stepped into the street. A taxi arrived. The experiment ended instantly. 5 years of research and millions in taxpayer money were defeated by traffic. The CIA later declared the project not viable, which is a polite way of admitting they forgot one critical variable. No amount of training will ever make a cat care more about national security than staying alive. 18. Switzerland is famous for precision watches, discrete banks, and absolute neutrality. In 2007, they accidentally proved that even the most neutral country on Earth can still invade someone by mistake. During a nighttime training exercise, about 170 Swiss soldiers marched through mountainous terrain in heavy rain with poor visibility. They went slightly too far. By slightly, we mean about 1 kilometer straight into Liechtenstein. There were no shots fired, no flags planted, no ultimatums issued. They simply got lost. The funniest part, Liechtenstein didn't even notice it had been invaded. No alarms, no emergency calls. A few hours later, Switzerland realized the mistake and quietly withdrew. The next day, the Swiss government formally apologized. Liechtenstein responded calmly, essentially saying, "No worries, just be more careful next time." It may be the only invasion in history where the invaded country was unaware and the invading country apologized for getting lost in the rain. 19. In the early days of nuclear testing, American scientists weren't just learning how powerful bombs were, they were also accidentally testing where space begins. During one underground test, engineers placed a thick steel manhole cover over the test shaft as a temporary seal. When the bomb detonated, nobody thought much about the cover until they reviewed high-speed footage. In exactly one frame, the manhole cover appears. In the next, it's gone. Later calculations suggested it may have been launched at over 200,000 kilometers per hour, faster than Earth's escape velocity. In other words, humanity may have launched its first object into space without realizing it. No countdown, no celebration, no flag, just a manhole cover disappearing forever, either as space debris or wandering the cosmos. If true, the first human-made object to leave Earth wasn't a satellite or a spacecraft. It was a piece of street infrastructure launched by scientific negligence. A rare moment where humanity advanced space exploration by forgetting where it left the cover. 20. During the Cold War, one of the British military's biggest fears wasn't Soviet nukes, it was cold weather. They designed nuclear landmines to be buried in Europe in case of a Soviet invasion. The problem was winter. Frozen ground could cause the electronics inside the bomb to fail. The proposed solution, documented in a top-secret report that sounds fake but absolutely wasn't, was to place live chickens inside the bomb casing. The chicken's body heat would keep the components warm enough to function. The plan included instructions for feeding the chickens, giving them water, and calculating how long they would survive inside a weapon of mass destruction. On paper, it was a renewable biological heating system. In reality, it was nuclear engineering powered by poultry. The plan was never deployed, but the documents remain as proof that global security once depended, at least theoretically, on whether a few chickens were willing to do their part for national defense. 21. Andrew Jackson found many ways to leave his mark on American history. One of them was smell. In 1837, the U.S. president received a massive block of cheese weighing around 1/400 pounds as a political gift. Instead of cutting it up and moving on with his life, Jackson placed the entire cheese wheel in the White House lobby and left it there. For 2 years, cheese is not wine. It does not age gracefully. It skips straight to becoming a biological weapon. The giant block produced a stench powerful enough to test the will of anyone who entered the building. Eventually, Jackson came up with a beautifully democratic solution: invite the public into the White House and let them eat it. Thousands of people showed up. They sliced it, grabbed chunks, chewed enthusiastically, and carried pieces away, turning the event into a full-scale national cheese invasion. After 2 hours, the cheese was gone. The smell was not. The White House had to air out the building for days. This may be the only moment in U.S. history where a political problem was solved by letting citizens consume the evidence. It also proves that sometimes even presidential authority is powerless against fermentation. 22. Thomas Midgley Jr. was the kind of genius who makes you feel impressed and simultaneously want to move all sharp objects out of the room. He invented leaded gasoline, which poisoned generations, and CFCs, which helped punch a hole in the ozone layer. If there were a leaderboard for inventors who accidentally damaged the planet, Midgley would be permanently ranked near the top. Ironically, his death came from yet another invention of his own. After becoming partially paralyzed, Midgley designed a pulley and rope system around his bed so he could lift himself up independently. On paper, it sounded clever. In reality, it was a physics experiment waiting to go wrong. One day, the system tangled. The ropes tightened around his neck. Midgley died of strangulation in the very device he built to improve his life. No enemies, no freak accident. Just a man who believed deeply that any problem could be solved with enough engineering. History sometimes calls this karma. A colder interpretation is simpler. If you've already designed things that harmed the entire planet, you should probably be extra careful with anything you build that goes near your throat. 23. Before the 1956 Olympics, Australia was preparing for the torch relay with maximum seriousness. The flames symbolized peace, unity, and the human spirit. Then a college student wondered, what if no one's actually paying attention? He tied a pair of underwear to a chair leg, soaked it in fuel, lit it on fire, and ran through the streets, pretending to carry the Olympic torch. And it worked. Police immediately escorted the flame-cleared traffic and provided security. Crowds cheered. The mayor prepared a formal speech. Only when the smell of burning fabric and the unmistakable shape of underwear became noticeable did anyone realize something was wrong. The global symbol of athletic excellence was in fact on fire and elastic. The lesson was painfully clear. If you act confident enough, look official enough, and have police walking beside you, you can turn almost anything that's burning into a national ceremony. The Olympics went on as planned, but history remembers this moment as proof that dignity is sometimes just one pair of underwear away from collapsing. 24. In 1986, the city of Cleveland decided to break a world record by releasing over 1 million balloons into the sky. The idea sounded wholesome: bright colors, celebration, live television, an entire city looking up together in joy. What nobody accounted for was physics. When the balloons didn't disappear and instead came back down, everything unraveled fast. Streets were covered. Rivers and lakes were clogged. Airports shut down. Animals panicked. Worse, rescue teams searching Lake Erie for 2 drowning fishermen couldn't see the water's surface because it was completely covered in balloons. The search was delayed. Both men died. The city was later hit with lawsuits over accidents, pollution, and property damage. The world record was revoked. The takeaway was simple: if you release enough balloons, they don't create happiness. They create airborne trash and turn a cute idea into a televised disaster. 25. During World War I, Russia decided that if normal tanks weren't intimidating enough, the obvious solution was to build one so large it couldn't be ignored by the human eye. Thus, the Tsar tank was born, a war machine nearly 3 stories tall, with enormous front wheels resembling Ferris wheels, and a design that looked like a child's sketch of a monster. On blueprints, it would crush trenches and dominate battlefields. In reality, it rolled forward a few meters and immediately sank into the mud. The engine was too weak, the weight was too great, the tiny rear wheel was completely useless. The tank sat there stuck and helpless like a monument to unchecked confidence. No battle, no glory, Just a massive machine slowly rusting in place until it was dismantled. The Tsar tank wasn't defeated by the enemy. It was defeated by terrain and math. History remembers it as the moment humanity learned again that bigger does not automatically mean better, especially if you forget to ask whether it can actually move. 26. Mauro Prosperi was an ultra-endurance marathon runner who entered a race across the Sahara Desert and quickly learned that nature does not care about your preparation. A sandstorm knocked him off course, separating him from the route and from rescue teams. For days, he wandered through the desert, surviving however he could, hiding in an abandoned shrine and waiting for help that never came. By day 9, exhausted and hopeless, Mauro reached a breaking point and attempted to give up, and then his own body refused to cooperate. Severe dehydration had pushed his system into survival mode so extreme that even that plan failed. With no other option left, Mauro kept going. Days later, he was found and rescued. He didn't just survive the Sahara, he became one of the very few people who can say they tried to quit life and were physically prevented from doing so by their own biology. The desert didn't kill him. Despair didn't kill him. His body made the executive decision not today. 27. Some countries are run by laws, some by constitutions. And then there are places run by the president's personal superstition. In Turkmenistan, the leader decided that black was unlucky, while white brought good fortune. The solution was simple: ban black cars in the capital. Not discourage, not recommend. Ban. Citizens were required to repaint their vehicles white or silver at their own expense because national luck mattered more than personal finances. The city quickly turned into what looked like a luxury car catalog. Anyone who refused couldn't register or legally drive their vehicle and was treated as opposing the nation's positive energy. There was no data, no safety study, just one man's belief elevated into national policy. It's one of the few places on Earth where your car's color can get you in trouble with the government. And a reminder that with enough power, superstition can become law, while logic is sent on permanent leave. 28. In the year 897, the Catholic Church decided that death was not enough to end a political grudge. Pope Stephen VI despised his predecessor Pope Formosus so much that he ordered the body exhumed and put on trial. The corpse was dressed in papal robes, seated on a throne, and assigned a deacon to speak on its behalf. The trial was conducted with complete seriousness. Stephen shouted accusations at the body, found it guilty, and carried out the sentence on the remains. The public watched this spectacle and finally decided they'd had enough. They revolted, captured Stephen, and ended his reign decisively. History remembers this as the Cadaver Synod, a reminder that when power, hatred, and religion collide, even the dead aren't safe and the living should probably start worrying. 29. There was a moment in Silicon Valley when adding the words AI and Wi-Fi to anything could raise hundreds of millions of dollars. Juicero was the peak of that era. It was a $400 internet-connected juicer with sensors, software updates, and proprietary juice packs. You put the pack and press a button, and the machine squeezed it. The problem was a devastating discovery: you could squeeze the pack by hand, faster, cleaner, and more effectively. No machine, no power, no Wi-Fi. The internet did what it does best. Videos went viral. Investors panicked. The company collapsed. Hundreds of millions vanished because nobody in the room had tried using their hands first. Juicero became the perfect symbol of how technology doesn't always make things smarter, it just makes stupidity more expensive. 30. In 1983, Soviet officer Stanislav Petrov was on duty at an early warning nuclear facility when alarms lit up. The U.S. had launched missiles, then more. Protocol demanded immediate escalation, meaning global nuclear war within minutes. But something felt wrong. If this were a real attack, why so few missiles? It didn't make sense. Petrov did the most dangerous thing possible. In a rigid system, he trusted his judgment over the computer. He reported it as a false alarm. He was right. The system had mistaken sunlight reflections for missiles. The world kept going because one man chose not to follow instructions. There were no medals, no celebration, just the uncomfortable truth that billions of lives once depended on someone willing to think the machine might be wrong. Outro. So after all these stories, maybe the real takeaway isn't that humans are stupid, but that we're stupid with confidence. No malice required, no grand conspiracy. Just enough authority, enough certainty, and the unshakable belief that I've thought this through. The scariest part is that most of these disasters didn't start with villains. They started with people who thought they were just a little smarter than reality. And history patiently wrote everything down. So who deserves the top spot on the list of terrible ideas executed with absolute seriousness? The ones who weaponized animals, the ones who trusted technology instead of thinking, or the ones who never stop to ask, what if I'm wrong? Pick one, laugh a little, then check yourself. Because the line between person watching this video and main character in the next one is sometimes just a single, very confident decision.